Welcome to Agenda News. Ukrainian lands are these days the scene of the most mind-blowing Game of Thrones of the century. This struggle between both sides of the war opens a new era in the dusty pages of world history. This period sheds light on how the Ukrainian army dragged the Russians into a swamp, both in the Donbas and on the southern front lines extending to the Crimea. Kyiv is carrying out a simultaneous offensive plan to liberate Crimea and disconnect the Donbas region and Putin's army from the borders of both Belarus and Russia. Since the last few weeks, we have witnessed the offensive activities of the Ukrainian army, especially in Zaporizhia, Berdyansk, Melitopol, Crimea, and the Russian cities around this peninsula. What about the latest situation on Ukrainians' eastern front lines? In the last few days, the Ukrainians have been idling the intensity of ground offensive activities on the southern front lines. Moscow perceived this war strategy of the Ukrainian armed forces as a period of pause. Currently, Russian officials were describing the Ukrainian advance on the southern front lines as insufficient. Normally, Russian officials describe the pause of the Ukrainian army in the trenches of the battlefield as a negative situation for Kyiv. But we understood from the incredible activity on the eastern front lines that this was a brand new offensive tactic in Kyiv. In the past days, the Ukrainian army started sudden and harsh offensive activities in the vicinity of Bakhmut, where it took the initiative, which even the Russians didn't expect. The Russians acted to make up for the gaps in these front lines after Wagner forces withdrew from Bakhmut and its environs. The Russian armed forces dispatched reinforcements to the city of Bakhmut and the positions near this city, but as Ukraine controls both Bakhmut and supply routes close to the city, more than 100,000 Russian soldiers fell into the net of the Ukrainian armed forces on their way to Bakhmut. After the withdrawal of Wagner troops from Donbas, the Russian Army's 1st Army, 2nd Army, and pro-Russian Chechen special forces are taking place in Bakhmut and its surroundings. There are around 42,000 troops in the Russian 1st Army and 46,000 in the Russian 2nd Army. In addition, the total number of pro-Russian Chechen forces in the region and the 1st Tank Army of the Russian Army and other support units is around 15,000. The Russian 1st and 2nd Army, formed for the Luhansk and Donetsk regions, has been feeling the power of Ukraine for months. After the breathtaking offensive of the Ukrainian forces in both Luhansk and Donetsk, two regions are operationally besieged, and thus 100,000 Russian soldiers are stuck in the middle of Chernom. Soldiers of Russia's 72nd Motor Brigade near Klishchivka, south of Bakhmut, were among the units that fell prey to the Ukrainians. If you remember, the Deputy Minister of Defense of Ukraine, Anna Maliar, reported that the last of the Ukrainian forces advanced 1,200 meters towards Klishchivka and 1,500 meters towards Kordiamivka, south of Bakhmut. Maliar also announced that Ukrainian troops still control the southwestern outskirts of Bakhmut, but the most intense clashes are now around the city. Therefore, thousands of Russian soldiers could not pass through this city and reached Bakhmut as the Ukrainian army finally took control of Klishchivka. But these units were allegedly under heavy attack by Ukrainian forces. The Ukrainians had almost blocked all entrances and exits to Bakhmut. While watching the war behind closed doors, Putin began to realize that he had lost when the gates of hell are closed. We will have to take into account the Russian soldiers who remained inside Bakhmut, because it's estimated that about 50,000 Russian soldiers are fighting in the city of Bakhmut at the moment. In addition to this number, if we consider the Russian reinforcements trying to reach this city from the vicinity of Bakhmut, we can clearly see that a total of 100,000 Russian soldiers are under the blockade of Ukraine. Among the Russian troops who wanted to reach the city of Bakhmut, news continued to come from the front lines in the north of the city. Even though the Ukrainians tried to completely shut down the transportation to the city, the Russians didn't give up and continued to spend their soldiers on transporting them to Bakhmut. Russia's 106th Air Assault Division, located near Berkivka, was among the teams